hello. Welcome to another edition of Wealth Transparency. Each week, what we do is we take headline stories that don't necessarily make it on the front page of your newspaper, but talk about what issues are lying out there below the headlines that are impacting your portfolio and what you should do about it. We have Michelle Connell, who is the CEO of Portia Capital Management, and we have Andrew Tang, who is the CIO of Turner Investment Group. So thank you both for being here again. You guys are the best. And anyone watching should definitely try to reach out to either one of these people, depending on which one kind of you think that you can relate to, and try to develop a relationship with them, because they are two of the very, very best in our business. So Michelle, I want to start off with the AI data center spending in communities for acceptance. And we know down here in Texas that there's a lot of conflict right now going on with data centers, and it's a big political issue as well. So can you take us through a little bit about data centers and how they're being used on a political basis?
I think everybody is for data centers unless it's in their backyard. And to a degree, I guess I understand that you're having, large companies, the hyperscalers, wanting to build out in different communities. And a lot of those communities do not want things built in their area. It's probably like other things throughout society that you don't want a big behemoth built there. So that being said, and also the costs associated with it in terms of, increased electricity if you lived in an area, also problems potentially with water. In Texas, you're seeing that constantly being referenced in commercials for the midterms, and you do reading, and that seems to be, it's going to be one of the top issues. And I think it's because of the costs, the nuisance, and not wanting that in your particular area. On the other side of that, some of these hyperscalers are paying to go into communities and also trying to woo them. I heard somewhere in Minnesota, can't remember if it was Amazon or Meta, doesn't matter. One of them was having like parties and bringing people in on the weekends and trying to get them to change their minds. I don't think it's going to happen. But how does that all impact investing? If things do slow down because of the pushback, it could mean that some of the stocks that have benefited don't do as well, because it means that you won't have as many semiconductors bought. You won't have as many Dell towers being bought. And everything that goes into building a data center, maybe we'll need less of that. And the AI build out won't be as big. It bears watching.
So how long does it take to build a data center?
Andrew, ask you.
Data center can take anywhere from, let's say, 1 to 5 years, okay, depending on the size and depending on the complexity. However, permitting and requesting for approval to build a data center will take you anywhere from 2 to 7 years. So 2 to 7 years to get approval. If you're lucky, you get 2 years. If you bribe enough politicians and if you donate enough and give to the community, maybe you'll be first on the list. And then after 2 years of review and approval with the engineering team and so on and so forth, provided that you will provide your own power, then it'll take again from 1 to 5 years, to build your data centers. From if you have an existing building, it'll be faster, and then the plumbing and and all that jazz. And so, yeah, it is time consuming, and you got to have the chips also. Right now, the demand for chips, for the high-end chips, is anywhere from 10 to 12 to 1, meaning for every high-end chip, there's at least 10 buyers waiting. So that's where we are right now. So that's the bottleneck. And then another bottleneck is memory. So when you put that all together, we are having some type of issues. But I think this whole thing about data centers is bad for the neighborhood and this and that is overblown, especially when it comes to electricity. Because again, I don't think anybody in their right mind will just say, well, we're going to tap into the grid, we're going to wait online. No, they're going to figure this out, okay? The path to least resistance is there. They're going to bring their own power. They will work it out. So power is not an issue, but they get the blame because the grid is old anyway. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and Michelle, we have an issue here because we have our own grid. I think we're the only state that has its own grid. So
True.
so the governor recently put a moratorium on building any new data centers, and then Trump reached out and said it was a bad idea to slow that down.
Given the demand that we put on that grid, especially, for example, this summer where you've had so many days in a row, I think we're breaking a record for number of days at 105 plus. We have 5 more in front of us. I think we need to focus on being able to supply residents and all the new people that are moving in here too. I mean, I'm technology focused, obviously, but you have to make sure that what we have right now covers the responsibilities of the population. So for once, I may actually think that the governor did something that was right.
Well, I'm going to bridge that over to China, but China has a real problem economically. It has a domestic demand problem that exports are masking. China's July numbers were surprisingly weak. Retail sales rose only 0.6 year over year. Industrial production slowed to 4.5%, and fixed asset investment fell 6.7 during the first 7 months. So I've been to China a couple times, and I have no idea how they collect their data. You would say, well, it's just like they collect it in the United States. And it seems so crazy over there. Obviously I don't speak, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I don't speak Chinese. So I don't know if they're just having normal conversations among themselves and they run their businesses just like the United States. But when you say that retail sales rose only 0.6%, I really question any of those numbers at all. Andrew, why don't, tell us about the Chinese economy the best that you can.
Yeah, the Chinese economy, it's still suffering from 4 or 5 years ago for the real estate bubble that burst, right? And since then, they are suffering from deflation, a youth unemployment, a really weak domestic economy, and over, an aging population as well. And so you have a second, largest economy having all kinds of problems from multiple fronts. And the most important thing is that, yes, they can manufacture a lot of goods, but they don't have enough local consumption. And so therefore, they have nothing, they really don't have any cards but to export. And export is their number one game. Whatever they can consume domestically, they have to push it out to sell. And because prices are still deflating in China and right now somewhat stabilized 2 months in a row, they're still dubbed they're exporting deflation. They're exporting deflation. And it's weird because when it comes to export, countries, they have a way to add tariffs, obviously, right, to protect their domestic industries. And so when they try to, export goods and the goods come down in prices, all of a sudden they export deflation, but it becomes inflation, to the end consumer. But overall, their local economy is recovering, but is still weak. When it comes to fixed asset investments falling down, foreign investments have been pulling out for years now. I think is probably as much as a decade already. When they really don't trust the system, when they don't have control over their operations, any investments coming into China had to be in a JV. And the CCP, they make all the rules, and they don't have to play fair. And there's no justice system like United States. And that's why it is not an attractive place for foreign investments anymore. And then for the auto industry, for example, they have learned so much and so well for the past decades that they have superseded, foreign countries and foreign investors and foreign manufacturers, in China. And they do it so well. And the foreign companies like Volkswagen, they can't afford to be there anymore. So they spend billions of dollars of building the factories in China. All of a sudden, they can't sell enough cars, and then they're selling the factories at a discount to a local, to a Chinese manufacturer. So it is very risky. It's risky business to invest in China. And I think countries and companies around the world have learned that the hard way over the years. Yeah.
And Michelle, China is the discussion right now, but do you not feel the whole world is kind of slowing down where, business is not that great in Europe and South America, things aren't that great. The United States, we think it's okay, but then you look at Japan, now they're raising rates, but I don't think it's because business is so strong.
No, they're doing that to offset what's going on with their currency and trying to handle the same time they have rising inflation, which they haven't had in a while. But to go to your first point, yes, growth is slowing around the world. And we're very fortunate that we're not being as affected. But when you look at Europe and the UK, they're slowing down precipitously. And that's a problem because at the same time, they have inflation rates that are continuing to climb. And there's nowhere in sight to see where that's going to change for them. There was an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal about maybe a month, 2 months ago, that compared the UK's economy to the state of Mississippi. Now there's a slap in the face in terms of, growth and stagnation.
I'd love to see that article.
I'll find it. I mean, it caught my eye because I have a lot of friends and business associates over there, and they're really hurting.
So another area that's hurting is the bond market on a global basis. And so the headline really is the global bond market is sending a warning. Long-term government yields have surged across several major economies. The U.S. 30-year Treasury recently moved above 5%, while Japan's 10-year approached 3%, near a 30-year high. The U.S. Treasury responded by more than doubling bond buybacks in an effort to improve market conditions. People really don't realize how important the credit market is to every country. And so, Andrew, which countries do you see as some of the strongest economically, and which countries do you see as some of the weakest?
Yeah, well, you look at the G7s, these are the strongest. If you just look at GDP, United States, China, and then in the Euro area, and then out of Euro is really Germany, right, and the UK. Japan comes before UK, and then India, it's right thereafter, and then France, Russia, Italy, Canada, Brazil, and Spain. So that's in that order. Now, the weakest, we can, go into, I'm scrolling down. Well, Bermuda is the weakest, supposedly. But they're a tiny country like the Marshall Islands and Antigua, those are very small countries. And, they do, they really do tourists, that's really the main GDP. But the rise in yield has been catching a lot of attention lately is because it hasn't reached these levels for a long time. Because for the past decades, the world's interest rates were low. And you can say artificially low, right? I mean, look at Japan. Japan was at zero. And remember the German bonds, the bonds, they were at negative for some time. You were actually penalized for keeping your money in the bank. And that was only a few years ago. It wasn't too long ago. So we just came out of decades of low interest rate environment, okay? And now we have this boom that we're meeting. And I have to refer back to this innovation boom with multiple innovation platform converging. And all of a sudden, we have a reason to spend money. That's very important. You need to understand that. So what does that mean? It means households and corporations, now we have a reason to spend money. Well, households, we need to update. We need to upgrade our laptops and get new phones or whatever. Inflation, domestic standard of living, we'll basically answer the household why we have to spend money. But corporations, we have a reason to spend money, starts with the hyperscalers because now we have AI infrastructure build out. We also have robotics. We want to upgrade our equipment. We want to, put upgrade to the grid. We want to do automation. We want to invest in, tech stack. Every company needs to basically catch up and spend. And now we have a good reason to spend. And AI is a great reason because we are still in the beginning stages of what it can do. Okay. So soon down the road, AI agents is not going to be so clunky and troublesome to work with like Claude right now. Soon, you're going to be able to work with these bots and agents. You will be able to talk to it. Talking to it, that dialogue becomes the operating system. So mark my word, this is going to be the future. And that's why we're not even halfway into this CapEx cycle, right? And there's $1 trillion that is trickling down. Now, because CapEx is there, because people have and companies have reason to spend money, they're not putting into bonds, okay? There's only so much money supply out there. So when that demand takes away from buying treasuries, the yield naturally goes up. So when a country or an economy goes through a boom, the yield naturally rises. It naturally rises. And we haven't seen that in decades, and that's why everybody's in shock. But at the same time, we just had $40 trillion of debt in the US. And so we are absolutely paying more than $1 trillion in interest payments alone, okay? That is similar to what we spend on defense, okay? Very similar, just a tiny bit more on defense. Now, this is not going to go away unless we figure out how to reduce government spending consistently. How many times, come on, Ed, Michelle, how many times we keep hearing that, oh, this is the deficit. Outside of the Clinton years, I haven't heard any administrations that are able to balance the budget, So when that's the case, yes, we can grow out of the problem by receiving additional tax receipts. Sure, we can do that. But this monstrous debt problem, it's going to turn into a debt spiral if we don't control government spending. And yes, AI can help because it can promote efficiency. It can increase productivity. And then you have also this movement, not going to get political, to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, across multiple departments. And hopefully something good will come out of it. People vote, right? People vote, and that's the voice, and that's the power, and that's the United States citizens' ability to make changes. And hopefully that we collectively as the people, we the people will be able to vote for a more efficient government. But we're not the lawmakers here. The lawmakers are always there to protect themselves. So here we are.
That was a lot and very, very well received. So, Michelle, I don't know how you follow that, but at the same time, what countries do you see, not from the size of them, but which countries do you see their debt being attractive?
I really don't do a lot in foreign debt, but I know that some emerging countries bear looking at right now. I've heard that over and over from people that's all they do is fixed income. So if you look at a country that has strong GDP and doesn't have an over-the-top ballooning deficit, I would think that it looks interesting. And the countries that have growth and that have the younger populations, I would look for those factors. And a government that leans towards democracy, if possible.
So Britain leads towards democracy, and its inflation jumped from 2.6 to 2.9, largely because of higher energy costs. The inflation around the globe is, just destroying countries. Besides Iran having 186% inflation, which is, a number that we hear a lot. And Japan, they raised their interest rates, but that was, as Michelle said earlier, was to protect their currency. But where do you guys see the inflation being worse around the world?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think inflation, it's going to come in on a surprise to the downside. Hear me out, okay? The rise in yield and the slower consumption, or you can say the rise in yield plus the poor consumer sentiment, it's really the result of the continuous conflict with the US and Iran, and as well as the rise in AI and the uncertainty of AI, what it will do to the job market, for example. And I said before that the labor market right now is in transition where, versus replacement. But nevertheless, people are scared and they're spending less money. That's the truth. When it comes to inflation, now, for example, take a look at oil, right? June and July CPI numbers, we see a nice retraction. Okay, that's deflation from the energy category altogether. Now, if I'm looking at this at a continuous conflict, I would expect oil to be trading at $100 in the futures, right? But it's not. Right now, September futures is trading at $88. So longer term speaking, about 5 years out, people are expecting inflation still to be tamed. And one of the biggest reasons is why is really the rise in technology and innovation. I think I sound like a broken record. I keep talking about this. Michelle, you're a tech analyst. Technology is your forte. What is the mission statement for technology? Is to do more with less, right?
Right.
is
Right.
to do more with less.
Exactly.
So if
Exactly.
we have years, if not decades, of this push, of this mission statement behind the scenes, working its way to the front, now it's hitting multiple channels. It's hitting the way we conduct work at the companies, how we change our processes, and how we are becoming more efficient when it comes to daily operations, how we capture resources, how we process things. So, as technology help us to get to the higher grounds, to achieve higher levels of productivity, it's deflationary. It's deflationary. And the longer that we have this conflict and the longer that oil prices stay high, it also becomes a creative destruction situation where people will find alternative ways to solve the problem. Again, I go back to COVID. COVID taught us a very valuable lesson. It's never overly depend on one supplier. You have to have many routes of sourcing, right? Just like, for us to go shopping, we have the technology in our hand now. If Amazon doesn't have it, we immediately check Walmart. Walmart doesn't have it, we go to Target. Then we go to, Wayfair or whatever it is. So we have multiple sources and everybody delivers it very fast. And so, consumers have the ability and have the technology to find different ways to solve a problem. And alternative energy, it is so quiet right now because the administration doesn't want to promote it. But behind the scenes, for example, India just became the third global largest electricity generator. Who knew? It's India. Okay, so alternative fuel, solar, not so much wind. Wind proved to be a very, very, troublesome mechanics behind it. But solar, it's really the way to go. And so we see all these things happening all at once, even though it feels horrible. But I truly believe that we're not going to see a huge amount of inflation. And therefore, it will lead to, I really don't think this year that the Fed will raise rates. Mark my word.
That being said, I'm going to interject with one fact that I heard from, I think I don't know her position, pretty high up in ADP. She's always on Bloomberg. And she was talking today that they had done a study internally and they found that the average American, their wages have gone up 3% and prices on average have gone up 7%. Now that explains what's going on with like Walmart reporting today with weaker sales. People just have less to spend. So I agree with you, Andrew, that over time with technology and innovation, yes, that productivity will help dampen prices and bring down a lot. But in the meantime, you have a lot of people that, it's really hard for them. They have less in their wallet. And we are fortunate here in this country. We're not hit as hard as other countries like UK and EU, but that statistic stood in my head today. She also had some other statistics regarding, costs versus wages since COVID for the average family. And it's not good.
Another statistic that might stick with you, and that is that for the first 17 months of Biden's administration, prices were up 13.8%. The first 17 months of Trump's second, prices are up 5.1%. But the media is out there trying to frame that Trump is the reason for affordability crisis, and that's just not true. But they're trying to pinpoint it onto him. And I can go through each, line item. Gasoline was up 170% under Biden in the first.
Probably true, yeah.
And under Trump, it was up, I think, 30% in his first 17 months. So, so to talk about inflation and to talk about, which country, are going to be hit the worst, I think everybody is going to be hit, especially until this war is over. And then they try to figure out what shipping lanes are viable, which ones aren't, which new relationships have been formed. It's, I never thought that this Iran war was going to last as long as it has, but it's definitely going to be disruptive in costs. And I think costs are going to remain pretty high.
Yeah, I think two items that are really kind of laying low and quiet, but it's really causing a lot of problem. And one is higher education and two is real estate, housing affordability. These two are the items that they're growing at least 3 to 5 to 7% year over year, and it's nonstop. nonstop. Higher education, private university will cost you room and board altogether about $100,000 per year now, roughly. Okay. If you're going to a local state school, hopefully, it'll be less. But nevertheless, higher education costs is just rising out of control. It's continuous. Real estate too. You see a lot of empty storefronts, locally on the streets, Main Street, downtown, wherever, New York, we still have a lot of them. But again, the real estate, there's so much wealth in real estate right now. The landlords are not forced to market. They don't even want to lower their leases, so it is becoming a huge problem. Housing affordability is the big problem. Higher education is a big problem. Food prices, I think we can find alternatives, and I think technology can help from that front, in terms of, loose goods, soft goods, and even durable goods. But when it comes to higher education and shelter, I don't know how tech is going to help. So, yeah, there is going to be some open questions there. And I think that's where politicians can come in. Yes, we do need to build more affordable housing, for those that can't afford it. And higher education, I think people are going to look for alternatives than a traditional, let's say, private universities, unless those that can afford it.
Well, this has been a great discussion on a lot of different fronts, and appreciate both of you doing this. And for those of you watching, please reach out to Michelle at Portia Capital Management in Fort Worth, Texas, and Andrew Tang at Turner Financial Group. He's the Chief Investment Information Officer. And so I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you, guys. And
Thanks, Ed.
And this has been Ed Butowski. So take care.